I find that what's happening today in the household, with two people are married or living together, there's more of a shared responsibility, or there better be more of a shared responsibility. I think we're getting down to a point where men are starting to understand that they want their own personal space and they want their personal liberalism, okay? That they have to respect the woman's role.
Just,
okay?
That's just what I was going to ask. Are they more willing to appreciate their space as well?
Of course. I think empathy is the key word.
Empathy.
Okay? Yeah, you know, exchange roles. How would I feel if I were the one whose foot was nailed to the floor, right? And had a clean
floor. Well, now that is a radical change, though, because I think in the past most men wanted to control, wanted to dominate. Now you're saying they want more equality.
And I am still single, and the days are gone, excuse me, when you can say, I'm a professional, aren't I neat? You just can't do that anymore. They really, and it's because of the times, they want to know you as a person. That's totally irrelevant. If you're not a decent guy, you're not a decent guy. No matter how much money you may make, no matter what your career may be, and I think that's right. That's the way it should be.
What do you value most in a relationship with a woman, or at least a couple of things that are very important to you?
The thing I value most in a relationship with women is good conversation, someone who doesn't always have to agree with everything I do, but you know, we're very compatible. And looks aren't that important. Age is not that important. But I think that if a girl and I communicate well, then it's going to be a very good relationship.
I think there are two things that I value the most. Number one is trust, and number two is respect. In today's society, we're working on a divorce rate of 50%. 1 out of every 2 marriages, I think, now ends in divorce. I think, number one, it's because there is not the trust, because we are a more open society, because people do go out more, people become jealous. I think trust between the two and respect for what the other person is doing. If I don't respect the woman, then she will look elsewhere to find that respect. Respect, and I want her to respect me. I mean, it's a two-way street on both sides. And I think if you have trust and respect for one another, it's going to be a very good relationship.
I think I look more at the total man. Sincerity means an awful lot to me. You know, I don't want somebody that thinks they have to act. I don't want you to portray an image. I want you to be honest, real honest, very open to me, and most of all, receptive to my ideas. You know, I don't want to be treated as a silly thing. You know, I'm a college student. I'm very intelligent. I like to be treated like that, not as an object, as a person. Treat me like you treat your brother.
Well, I don't know what really happened, except that a long time ago I was a chauvinist. In the real sense, I would be with the guys and we would talk about a woman. About the only personal thing we mentioned about her would be her name, and the rest of it was physical description. And then I, over the years, just realized that this was boring. You know, I wasn't satisfied with this. And then I did get some pressure from women, friends of mine, who said, well, you know, hey, look, I don't buy this anymore. And that kind of forced me to wake up and say, well, wait a minute, maybe I've been doing this thing all wrong. Maybe what I was taught and being the provider and the father or the husband was not so much wrong in itself, but it was such a final approach. There was no room for anything different or no room for flexibility in a relationship. And over the years, I realized that you can have both. You can have an equal partnership. And hey, I found out I enjoy cooking, for instance. And I'm a pretty good gourmet cook now. And I cook for myself, or if I have a date, I'll cook for someone. And there was a time, though, when I just thought that was taboo.
What do you think has accounted for this? Dick mentioned the women's movement. Do you think that's had a positive effect on us?
That and additional education, and we know various values that really are far superior to the mere image of macho.
But Marvin, don't you think that maybe we're looking at this from the perspective of the people that we know and from our peers, I wonder if this is really true, you know, in other areas and
It's very possible that a different age group, you know, still looks upon it quite different. We know that it means nothing at our age to have the macho image. It gets you absolutely nowhere. You're laughed at.
Has this been a change, though? You mentioned at your age. I mean, you're not an old man by any stretch of the imagination, but when you were younger, did you feel more of a need to live up to this so-called macho image?
I think so, yes. I really believe that, you know, that the macho image carried with it many wonderful things, but now I know different. I've lived through certain periods in life, and it's meaningless in the final analysis. But I would say in the 20s and 30s, it still means a lot to be perceived as a macho man.
It seems to me that there's a lot of men, though, that still suffer from this macho image kind of thing, both in the way they act and maybe the lack of it.
I think that's insecurity. I really do. I think they're afraid to change, and they're not really sure how they're going to come across if they're not a hero, if they're not important, you know, and it's a whole threatening of ideas to them. But I think that gradually you'll see the trend change more and more, because women just simply aren't accepting the He-Man image anymore. The macho, it doesn't mean anything. Personally, I don't want it. I'm really turned off by people that think they have to act like a hero.
A man's life begins in the womb. His first 9 months, give or take a week or two either way, are spent in a strange land. But over the course of time, he grows accustomed to his surroundings and begins, in fact, to feel at home. He feels protected, he feels safe, and he feels comfortable. He is nourished, he is cherished, he is sustained, he is given his very life itself. He is, in a word, completely and totally dependent, but he is happy and thinks he will live happily ever after. Then he receives a rude awakening. Something happens. It is called the miracle of birth. He crawls out, shakes his head, sees the light, and enters a foreign and frightening world, and has but the one thought, I want back, let me in, Mom, please let me in. He tries desperately to get back in. He craves the refuge of the womb, but it's no go. He can never more return. He is rejected. At that precise instant, he feels his first taste of rejection. It is a feeling that is never to leave him. He spends his entire life in quest of fulfilling this desperate need, often not even knowing or able to admit that the need exists. So he denies, he lies, he strides, he blusters, he strikes, and sometimes, when nobody is looking, he even cries. Don't feel so bad there. Now the question is, of course, why is it not the same for the woman? Why doesn't she have these same feelings? Well, perhaps she does, but my friend here has a good answer. My friend, your answer, please. Your answer. Say the answer. Come now. Surely you remember. You remember we were talking the other day. Yes, you said it just the other day. Because it's their playground, they know where they're at. Yes, you're afraid, aren't you? Yes, you are. You're afraid. Why, you have fear. Why, does anybody want this young man? Nice young man, fairly good specimen of manhood, a little puny perhaps, but not bad, not bad. What am I bid? Anybody bid? Do I hear $5? $5? Come on, $5. 5, 5, 10, 10. Do I hear 10? Do I hear 10? 9? Do I hear 9, 9, 9, 9, 8, 7, 6? Come on, $5. 5, 5, 5. Do I hear 5, 5, 5, 5? 4? All right, $4. $4 for this beautiful specimen. $3? All right, $2. All right, sold to the man in the back seat for $2. All right. $2 for this man's soul. Stephen Rydell. Well, there you have our show for tonight. 45 minutes now. As you can plainly see, Theater for Ideas is doing something new tonight. There is no panel. And since this program grew out of my experiences and is a very personal one, and since I have some experience as being a man or close to a man, let me begin with that. My life as a man. The reason that I felt the need for this program is that I do not see very much written about men, about their needs, and about their feelings. We have seen a lot in the papers and magazines in recent years about women, their problems, their discoveries, their joys, but very little about men. Myself, I took this very personally. However, I'm pleased to see from the interviews that we ran, from talking with men in the course of researching this program, that not all men, in fact, most men do not feel that way, that they are feeling very good themselves about being liberated from this macho image, which I was liberated from about the day I was born, I think. I've never had it. But I also have felt often at a disadvantage because I have not had it. I have felt in many ways, I think, identified with women when they say things like men are demeaning toward them, men try to control them, men try to be superior to them, not only try but do. I have felt that way a lot. Perhaps that explains my strong reaction to the lack of attention about men, since I don't even identify with males in many cases. I also think of friends of mine. I think of one in particular who a few years ago took his own life, and I feel that that life was in vain in the sense that Jim never had any kind of support group. I have been very pleased in, for example, the Vietnam Vet Center, and seeing how those men support each other, try to grip and cope and deal and solve the problems that horrible war left them with, and in many ways left us all with. So these are some of the things that I was thinking of as I came up with the title, The Death of the American Male. What do I mean by the death of the American male? Well, that's for you to help me answer. So I would like to begin and ask some response to either the mime and or the interviews that you saw at the open of the show. You heard those men say that they were freeing themselves from the macho image, that they were learning that they can be friends with women, that they don't have to put on this role. You heard the young woman say that that is the kind of man that she wants. Other women that I interviewed that day said pretty much the same thing. Well, you said that you would be willing to talk, so I'm going to pick on you. Let's start with the interviews. Do you have any strong feelings about those interviews?
Yeah, it seems that so often that when people are looking at the macho image, that they're picking at the negative aspects of being male, and maybe there's something positive to some of the male stereotypes, as there are with any stereotypes. For example, the idea that of achievement, of power, of planning, of control of your own destiny. And I just wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater if we're talking about doing away with the macho image. Maybe there's something worth saving.
Okay. What might be worth saving from that? I asked because most of the comments I got were that is not worth saving and we should free ourselves from it.
Well, I don't think it's valid to say that we should free ourselves from achievement, from trying to do the best we can and to accomplish things in life. That doesn't mean that you have to use other people as as Kleenex and step all over them and be totally unsensitive, but that doesn't mean that you have to be so thin-skinned that everything destroys you. There's some positive aspects to being male, as well as some of the negative aspects that were brought out by some of the interviews.
Do you have any response to the sketch that we did?
I feel sorry for that poor fellow. Again, it seems as if he has none of the, like I said, the positive aspects of what people have said being male is about. You plan your life, you accomplish things, you have control. Like I said, I feel sorry for him.
Did you in any way identify with him?
No.
Did anybody identify with the poor soul in the sketch in any way? Nobody identified with him? Do we have a hand over here that identified with him? All right.
Gee, that doesn't mean I was going to talk. I just identified with him. But I think really all of us identify with him, whether we want to admit it or not. We're all oriented to being achievement-oriented. We want everyone to think that we're wonderful and that we're popular, and we go through life, or at least if my life is any indication of what anyone else's is like, we go through life thinking that everyone needs to love us or we're a failure. And if that doesn't happen, we sort of go back into our room and think what went wrong, and then hope that the next day is going to be better, and that somehow by trying a different cereal or a different brand of cologne or a different type of shirt, everyone is going to realize that hidden potential inside us and recognize how great we really are.
You mean that won't work? The cologne and stuff? Now you tell me.
Still working on it.
I need a refund from some companies, I tell you. Anybody else now? Some points have been raised about both the skit and the interviews. Some of the things that struck me about the interviews was the fact that the one man said that it's no big deal now that you're a lawyer or your position, that people are more interested in who you are, what matters to you more than the image. I'd like to get some ideas or comments about work, because I think a lot of the comments in the Playboy magazine interview or survey that they commissioned Lewis Harris to do, one of the questions they asked men, and this was a national survey, was about work and what work meant to them. Most men, overwhelming majority, said that the meaning of the work was much more important to them than the money. Of course, they were interviewing, I think, affluent men, but anybody have any comment on that? In your own work, what do you value in your own work? Anybody? We have to start asking some people. Yeah.
Well, I would think it's true that men derive a sense of satisfaction and part of their self-image, as it were, or a sense of worth from their job, their employment. Maybe this gets back to the John Wayne type image where you mentioned a minute ago, about feelings and about support groups, but whereas maybe the woman gets that sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, with her home and her children, I think men tend to rely on their career, their work to provide that. And I think in Fort Wayne today, what with the industry and the economy and the layoffs that we're seeing, I I think we're seeing a direct result with the number of men out of work or unable to provide for their families, resulting in an increase in separations, divorce filings, this type of thing, because I think this follows naturally that when their prime source of support for their own self-image and how they feel about themselves is not there, then you see the resultant problem in the family. You know.
You mentioned, though, that you think that women get their self-image from other ways. Don't you think that is changing in our world today, that women are wanting to find satisfaction in means other than staying home and taking care of the kids?
That's probably right, but you know, maybe that's based from, like I say, my background, or maybe a carryover from the same image that the fellows talked about on the tape.
Do you think that that divorce is a result then of the economy, that men are out of work and therefore they can't cope their marriage as a result? Couldn't that also bring a marriage closer together?
It could work both ways, I would think, depending on the individual situation. You know, it could be perhaps a trying time, something that would draw people together, or then again, perhaps, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back the other way. Thank you.
I know we have several divorced men. I'd like to get some of their comments on this, too.
This gentleman mentioned something I'd like to pick up on. He said that we men a lot of times define ourselves in our work, and just on a linguistic basis, that's very true. If you ask somebody, who are you, they'll respond by naming their job. I'm a physician, I'm an engineer, and it's almost as if in one word they are buying into an entire set of values and goals, and it's easily defined for them. And in a way, that's very comforting, because you don't have, a lot of times you won't have to further explain yourself, but at some point you may find that you really don't fit in to everybody's conception of what that professional group is. That's something that I don't think, at least until very recently, women haven't had.
But there's a lot of, the death of the salesman kind of thing in a man's work, too. I mean, that not every man is successful. I mean, we're almost defined by success and failures, winners and losers. That men who have a job that they like, fine. But what about all of those, like the friend I mentioned earlier, who don't? Who don't get any feelings of satisfaction from their work. And it seems to me that women more and more want to get into this kind of man's world. And yet isn't that a world often of ulcers and failures and getting fired and that sort of thing?
Yeah, but I think the real trick is to find what you do best, because a lot of times it's a matter not of you're having no talent or aptitude, it's just that talent not fitting what you're doing at the right time.
How many men in the audience like what they're doing right now, the work that they do? Who doesn't? Anybody that does? How about the women? The kind of work that you're doing. Who likes their work? Isn't there a Willie Loman in here somewhere that just hates what he's doing? Yes? All right, let's go here.
Yeah, I really don't mind my job, but I mind the restrictiveness of it. I work in a shop where it's all men. I work in a machine shop, and we have a couple women. They're secretaries, and I feel really, refined in my employment by being, with men all my life, or just with men all day long. I'm used to, going to school. There's women around, and there's a lot more variety. And at work, it's restricted in the way that there isn't as much communication and sensitivity, and there's this part where you have to be really, the macho image fits in there, and you feel like, you have to get the job right, and you have to get it done as quickly as possible, and all sorts of other things. And I think that's true in all aspects of American life for the men, that there's a large part where men are closed to their own emotions, to others' emotions, and they have a high need to strive, a high competitiveness. That's this part of capitalism where a man has to be at the top, and only men can do it right. And if a man cries, he's not a man. And if a man gets divorced, he's not a man, and all sorts of role models that are really bad. And I think that a lot of the male stereotypes, the characters of them need to die, so we can get more of the good characters of women through to men, such as nurturing. At work it'd be a lot better. It's not just my fault. It's not everybody's fault. It's a whole culture, because there's so much put into making us a man, and making you a man. It's just like the American car. You have to be big and powerful and everything else, and it's got to die. And I can't wait till it dies, because what's going to come in is going to be even better. And so far, you see little Japanese cars coming in, and start comparing that to the characters of males, and you can see it's going to get better, especially when the man dies, because we're just going at a pace where we're killing ourselves. We're living, like 7 years less than women, and we're shooting each other, and we're making unemployment greater, and men aren't solving the problem. Plus, the women that are unsatisfied with their jobs, we're oppressing them in their roles. We're making them have to stay home and take care of the babies when we could be home taking care of the babies and watching them grow and learning a lot, learning how to nurture our own children, which would enable us to nurture, our fellow man and other fellow women.
Would you be willing to stay home and take care of a child?
Oh, yes, I would. It'd be a more satisfying job than I have now. And I think most men would see to it. It's a harder job, too, because staying home is a 24-hour job. We're going to work, it's an 8-hour job, and you come home and you expect not to work. But, mothers have to work all the time. And then once their children leave, they have a gap in there. So I think if men stayed home and took care of the kids, they'd realize what a shock it is to have the kids leave, and feel like they're not whole anymore, and they're not comfortable in the role. So I think, our being as oppressed in our role equally oppresses others in their roles.
And you think that this is going to change? This is that you said that you think that you used the analogy of the Japanese car. This seems to be the consensus, that things are changing, yet you mentioned the lifespan of the male is shorter. Males are killing themselves off. There is an increase in violence in our society. Males are in many ways expendable. Males fight wars, women don't.
I agree. I think things are going to have to change. Just for all the aspects of society have to change eventually. And I'm not sure the American man is big enough to make those changes. So I think the women's movement's been going on for 100 years, and it may take another 300 years for the women's movement to get a full peak. But I think it's going to happen eventually. And I won't be alive when it happens, but I hope I can take part in it right now.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I think we're all talking about this word macho. I think maybe we ought to talk about it. What does it mean? We hear it an awful lot. Does it mean that you can eat dirt and knock the hell out of your neighbor and sleep with a woman all night long? What does it mean? I can't define it.
I always thought it meant all those things and more, but yeah.
It would be nice, but sometimes I think it's very unrealistic. I don't have any inadequacies as far as feeling that I'm a male or I'm a human being or anything else. It's just macho. You hear it all the time. Sometimes I think it's fake. I think you can get awful drunk and maintain it if that's what you think everybody expects from you. But as far as being realistic, sometimes I think it has certain connotations that aren't quite realistic, But the word macho, we're talking about it, but I don't feel like we really have defined what it means, I think I'd like to hear on this myself.
Anybody have a definition of macho? Yes.
To me, macho, when the word is mentioned, it means a man that goes out and settles all his problems by using his fists. He doesn't cry, he doesn't feel, he doesn't give, he's not a tender, warm person. That's my image of macho. And I think that's what women are tired of. They want men who are tender and kind and feeling and can cry with them.
Thank you. Yes. Rick.
Terry, it's not an original statement of my own, but I tend to agree with a friend of mine's statement that in our society, basically, we're allowed two feelings, to be either enraged or angry or horny as men, and I think that there's a tremendous amount of truth to that. I guess one of the reasons that I enjoy what I do in terms of employment so much is that my job allows me to be a human being, a person, rather than a male machine that, makes the money, takes it home, and then crashes when he gets home, and then gets up and does the same thing, and is not involved with family, not involved in doing anything, but slowly or in some cases very quickly killing themselves.
Since we're on the subject right now, macho, I know that you won't mind if I say that you are a counselor at the Vet Center. How are you finding, and we will be doing a show next week, but I do want to ask you, how are you finding these men who are trained to be the ultimate in macho, soldiers, dealing with these changes that we've been talking about here tonight? And are they trying to change in general?
I perceive that a lot of the veterans that I deal with would like to change very much. Many of them do not have the skills to bring that change about. They're very afraid, very scared of changing. There aren't that many what I consider to be very good role models out on the street. I know of a number of good role models, but they're not prominent in our society because of the way our society is situated. Some of those veterans, at least in my opinion, have done some tremendous changing. But what has taken 30 years to accomplish is not going to be unraveled overnight either. And they would like to change so badly sometimes that they get so frustrated that it doesn't turn around 180 degrees in, say, 4 or 5 weeks. And but I sincerely believe there's a lot of those vets that want to change so bad they can taste it.
What are some of the things in your counseling, trying to get to some concrete ways that we can deal with this change from the macho male to the sensitive male? What are some of the things that you try to deal with, try to get these men to deal with?
Well, I think my position in and of itself creates an environment for change, in that I'm a peer counselor. I'm not hopefully an authority figure. Hopefully I'm appear to be fairly laid back and empathetic, not sympathetic or anything like that. Listen to what they have to say, what they're feeling, because they're afraid in many cases to really tell people what they're feeling inside, whether it relates to the military and combat or to their 30 years of existence as a male in this society. I think that, well, I know that on a number of occasions I very pointedly state that it's okay to cry. If I sense that a person is on the verge of emotionally breaking down, then I have to say something to that effect so that they don't suppress it and make it that much more difficult at a later date to feel as though they are a real person.
Thank you. Thank you. You had your hand up a few minutes ago. Can I pick on you? Did you want to say something? You did have your hand up, right? What did you want to say?
You asked if there were any women in the audience that didn't like their jobs. I guess I'm one of them. I'm a substitute teacher for the Fort Wayne schools, and although there are aspects of my job that I do like and do appreciate, there are also aspects of the job that I don't like and have a really hard time dealing with. I don't feel like I get to do with the students what I want to do as a teacher and what I want to teach them and help them with, because I'm not in one place long enough to do it. I'm not in one place long enough to develop any kind of a relationship with students, teachers, faculty, administration. It's really frustrating. All I do is go in and play a disciplinarian, practically. And I get a lot of, well, it's just frustrating. And I'd rather have a full-time job.
Do you feel it's harder for you because you're a woman? I mean, do you think it would be easier for you to get into the school system if you were a male?
I don't think it would be easier for me to get into the school system, but I think it would be easier for me to deal with my job. I feel like I go into a lot of teachers' lounges, and especially, well, for example, I went into one the other day, and I walked into a room full of men, and they just all stared at me like they'd never seen a woman before, and it was really intimidating. I feel like I'm looked at as an object rather than a person in most schools, and especially by men.
You don't think that's changing then? From the comments on the tape, the feeling was, at least from the women that I interviewed there, that this was changing, if for no other reason than they would not tolerate, as you heard the woman say, that she wouldn't tolerate that kind of behavior from a male, and yet it still seems to be around.
Oh yeah, it's still around. I feel it all the time. And I don't know how to deal with it, and deal with it effectively, I don't think. I haven't been in the school system that long either. I mean, I'm sure it's probably a great improvement from what it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, but it's still there.
Okay, we've heard some comments here about macho and sensitivity. What do you look for in a man?
Intelligence, sense of humor, respect for me as a person, and respect for my intelligence, sensitivity, and caring for other people.
Yeah, are you finding men that will respond in that way, or is it still very, very rare? I mean, you mentioned the teacher's lounge and so forth, but outside of that, are you finding men that respond to you with that kind of sensitivity?
Not really. I haven't met a whole lot of men outside of teachers' lounges. So no, but I'm sure they're there. I mean, I have a lot of friends that I met in school that are that way, so I know they're around.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about macho. I think it, in our generation, primarily should apply to the female, because every year in this nation, we have 1 million legal abortions. So in a period of 10 years, the women of this nation will have killed 10 million children. That is 10 million of their own children. And when you can kill 10 million of your own children, that's macho.
Well, that takes us in a different direction, I think, yes. Thank you.
I have to disagree with this man, really a lot. You know, it's not, in the first place, it's a woman's choice to have an abortion. I think this country, the macho-ness of this country is killing its men faster. The manufacturers of automobiles are killing their men industrially. The manufacturers of nuclear products are killing their men. But these women, but any woman who has an abortion, a lot of these women have husbands too who make that choice. In a lot of cases, it's the man making the choice for the woman. And another thing is all the men performing the abortions, they're all the physicians performing abortions are usually men. So it's not women who are macho. I think it's great that people have to start taking control of their own fertility. And part of the macho-ness is that we have not come up with a better way for birth control. And one of our means of birth control is war. And that's no way to, or genocide or anything else. So I think when you say abortion makes females macho, you may be right in that it makes them really cold, but they feel it. They feel it worse than anybody else.
Thank you. Yes.
A very drastic form of birth control has been mentioned by these two gentlemen, but I think the women's movement has kind of instituted another form of birth control, and I wonder about its long-term effects, and that is that the top 10, 15, 20% of the intelligent women in this country, where they were formerly being mothers and having children. They now have graduate degrees, and they are not having 3 and 4 children. If any, they're having just 1. And I wonder, in 50, 100 years, what is going to be the long-term effect of skimming the cream off the genetic pool? I know that's a really unpopular view, but I wonder, in 400 years, are they going to be looking back at the 1970s as a turning point in human civilization? I don't know.
May not be around that long to look back, the way things are going, yeah.
Sometimes it seems when it comes to babies, it takes 2 people, and I don't think that we should ever forget that. I don't know. Seems like a good idea. I don't know. Babies are good things to have, and sometimes it seems it takes an element of responsibility. I think we all run around a lot and want our cake and eat it too. And I don't know, I've worked in hospitals for a while, and sure methods of birth control are kind of shaky. There's all kinds of ways of getting around doing things. Now there's even an off-again, on-again vasectomy, which I think is probably the ultimate thing that science has come up with, you know. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of medical things to be taken into consideration when you start, no, I don't want to say messing around. I want to say interfering with reproductive cycles and mankind, so forth.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike, do you still want to say something over there? But you walk around here and save us a... Thank you.
One of these days I'm going to be at one of your programs, and it'll be on Scandinavian architecture, and I'm sure that somebody's going to figure a way of tying that in with abortion. It seems as though they find a way of tying it in with everything else. But I thought that we were maybe straying a little bit, and the thought occurred to me that one of the problems that I have, and I think that it may be a problem for other people, is that 30 years ago, 70 years ago, 150 years ago, there were some real clear-cut role models. You had your John Waynes, you had your heroes from past eras. They might have been on TV shows or in movies, and before that you had books that you could read about. And the good guy always got the girl at the end, and everybody lived happily ever after. And now if we look at the role models, we've got everything from the Clint Eastwoods to the Robert Redfords and the Dustin Hoffmans and the John Voight, everything from the old-fashioned macho hero to the anti-heroes and the nice guys. But the nice guys end up being not very happy at the end. They're confused, and we go to the movies and we think, which one of these guys are we supposed to emulate? You know, none of them are getting the girl in the end, or they have her for a little while and she leaves and finds somebody else who's a wimp or a macho or whatever it was I was trying not to be. And I think that there is some real usefulness in stereotypes. We've thrown away a lot of the old stereotypes, but we don't have any good positive ones to replace them, and I think that's where part of the confusion comes from and is the reason for so much of the divorces and the wife abuse that we're seeing, nervous breakdowns, ulcers, so many of the problems. Nobody knows what they're supposed to be. If we're not going to be macho, what's going to replace it?
Well, right, and we opened the show with that question of changing male and, you know, the transition and what is his role. But the answer seems to be that we should not be playing roles and should try to be ourselves. And yet we are very dependent on models for our behavior. And I'm really getting discouraged because I've just taken, you know, a whole series of Clint Eastwood, how to act like Clint Eastwood classes, and now you and Eli Belil tell me that Clint Eastwood image is out. So I guess I'm behind times all the time. How does some of you men feel about the comment the lady made that she isn't finding very many men who are sensitive? That's what men are saying. They're saying we're sensitive, but are they? You know, it's easy to say. We have a nod back here. Could I ask you your opinion about that? See, you shouldn't. Excuse me. This cord will be the end of me someday. Yes.
Yes. Well, I work with a lot of men, and I'm married to one. And no, I don't think men are very sensitive.
A lot of women are married to men, but...
Yeah. And I don't think men are very sensitive at all. I agree with her a lot.
we won't name names, but I mean, in what way do you think that men are not sensitive? I mean, what kind of experiences are you basing that on? I'm really interested in this because every male that I've interviewed has said that, in effect, I'm sensitive, I think other men are sensitive, and you're disagreeing.
Men don't seem to want to show their feelings. They don't want to let you know that something bothers them or that they hurt or something like this. That's what I mean. Just they can't show how they feel.
Because they're frightened, you think? Or,
I don't know why.
thanks. Yeah.
I disagree with that. You know, I feel like a lot of emphasis are put on the man every time this sensitivity rouses or whatever. The male doesn't have sensitivity. He doesn't want to show. I don't think that's right. I think it takes two to make and two to break, whatever the situation is. And fine, place half of it on the male, but also place half on the female.
Thank you. Yes.
If I could expand on that just a minute, I think one reason men might be afraid to show feelings in a family situation. If you look at, the statistics where maybe a third of your marriages end in divorce, then you've got a situation where the man is supposed to be the one that is routinely evicted from his home on a restraining order, for example. The man is supposed to be the one that is denied access to his children, to his property, and we've seen a lot of fellas in this type of role. They might be a pretty feeling individual, but to be able to get on with with their job and to just keep any control at all, you have to suppress those feelings. You mentioned earlier with the gentleman from the VA hospital about a support group. There's a group in
There's a Vietnam Center, but
for support group for Vietnam Center. We're also getting a few contacts on a group of fathers that are trying to work on this, the problem from a broken family aspect. I think the home situation, in the event of a marital problem down the line, a divorce or a child custody situation would tend to require a man to totally bury his feelings, because if not, they'd be totally unable to cope with that situation.
So you're saying that a reason, at least, that men do not reveal feelings is there's good reason for the fear that if they do, they're going to get crunched. And a divorce, an unfair divorce settlement is one example of that.
Well, I'm saying if they would operate on a feeling basis, this might be a lot more difficult for them. I mean, you go in a divorce situation and maybe you've got a man-woman relationship and, equal rights being what they are and this type of thing. Maybe a man and woman have a property that they have to divide, or they have a custody situation with children that they're just agonizing over, And a judge or some lawyers might say, well, Mr. Jones, you mean to say you'd put your children out on the street, I mean, why can't she have the house? Why can't she have the, custody of the children? Just naturally, you go live down at the YMCA, In other words, if a man's purpose in life is to involve around a family, he, is then denied that continuity, with the exception of, maybe a couple hours on a weekend or every other weekend. You see that, that problem, quite a bit.
How many men are divorced in the audience? Yeah.
Well, 2 points. First of all, one that's sort of a semantic point, but it may pause. Part of the problem is he just got done saying his kids. his house as opposed to their kids in their house. That's a small point, but I think it's very important. Also, I'd like to announce that I am not anywhere near as sensitive as I'd like to be. And I think that comes back to a very large extent on not just 26 or 27 years, but probably back from Cro-Magnon forward, where you're really taught. We may or may not be as good as the women as being sensitive because we have not had anywhere near as much practice. And on a third side point, I have not been able to come up with a definition of sensitive that I'm comfortable with either. Getting back to the macho problem we were having earlier. I just, what is sensitive? Why there?
Okay.
I guess one problem is that all virtues pushed to an excess are false. You can be sensitive to an extreme where you are so thin-skinned you can't operate. You can be strong to an extreme where you're brittle. I think one real shame is that there are human attributes and human faults, and that these have been seemingly arbitrarily lumped into groups called male and female. And the more we recognize that we have to be good humans rather than good males or females, the better we all will be male and female and being liberated people.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to get over here. Well, go ahead. I'm right here.
Well, I don't know. It seems like it's called the death of the American male. That sounds awful final. And I think what causes death, sometimes I think that it has something to do with an expectancy. If you expect things from other people, it seems as though you're constantly setting yourself up to be disappointed in situations, And with women's lib, and which I hear men's lib is coming on too, which ought to be, I have no idea what it's about, but I think it ought to be interesting too, that it's an equality. There really isn't a competition. It shouldn't be set up as being competition, that you should have to really compete for things, And I don't know, I've always known life to be that there's an element of the male and the female and an element of the male and the female, and one chromosome makes a difference. And I just recently read an article by Shirley MacLaine, who I've always really liked, and she says the latest trend is that women are sleeping with younger men, and that's because that younger men nowadays are more objective, more positive, and recognizing the feminine aspect in their own being. And that's not saying, that they're out diddling on, south of Main Street or whatever direction it is down there, but it's just that there's a harmony to be established, I think, without so much expectation of saying, you've got to be so-and-so. I hear a lot of women say, well, you should be the breadwinner, but there's a lot of women breadwinners too, and that's just the way it is. I'm not saying it's wrong, but that is the way it is. And
thank you. I'm going to get a few women breadwinners over here before we run out of time.
Very good, Terry. You picked the wrong one. I'm unemployed. But to follow their thought, I think that's true. We all have to integrate human qualities. There's a Chinese philosophy of the yin and the yang, the complementary male and female, that we all have to integrate within ourselves. And as he said that he wasn't as sensitive as he'd like to be, well, I'm not as assertive as I'd like to be either. And I think we all have to work on those complementary qualities that'll, flesh us out, make us whole human beings.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm not a breadwinner for any household, but when you asked about the sensitivity of men, sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out where a man is supposed to be sensitive and where he isn't. And I can see this in my own brother, because I was 3 and he was 8 when my parents got divorced, and there's 2 other kids in the family, and one of them's an older sister who's the oldest of all of us. So there's an 8-year-old kid who has a 7-year-old brother, a 3-year-old sister, and a 13-year-old sister, and he's supposed to figure out where he is and what's going on and be the man of the family when he's got 2 women, over him all the time. And I can see it now, even though, he lives down in Texas. When he calls, it's, just a hi, how are you, goodbye. He just doesn't, he has a hard time finding out what he's doing and where he's going and why he's there, because he had some rough times just getting where he is now, and that ain't the greatest, but he's working on it. And when he left, he was on his own at 17. I mean, he just left. And when he left, he looked at me and he goes, I'll be back for you. And he's come back, but I still you know, I still can't figure out how he made it. And he has a tough time when we just recently lost an aunt of ours, and he just kind of went, oh. And that I have a hard time dealing with, to find, you know, to help him through the crisis and everything. And it's hard for a woman to know what to do to, you know, help a man out of his, maybe a sticky situation or what have you, but it's a two-way street. You know, the man has to open up, and so does the woman. And a lot of times that's hard for us to do, too.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say something about sensitivity. One of the gentlemen earlier mentioned that he thought there was a possibility of being too sensitive. I would equate sensitivity as something like one of the senses as eyesight, perhaps, that I don't think you can see too well. For instance, I don't think you can be too sensitive. I think it's a skill to be refined, and so on. I don't equate being too sensitive with being spineless, for instance. I think it's important as a man not to feel too threatened to speak from the heart, and I know it's very scary for me to see how fragile and tenuous my feelings are. So I think that's one reason that you know, that the male image is dying, is that men are becoming more in touch with their heart and being able to express themselves and realizing how fragile relationships and life is.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my panel tonight, which is everybody in the audience. Thank you so much for coming and for your comments. The death of the American male. The question, is man, the male, changing? If so, for the better, in what way? We did not make any definitive answers, but I think we raised a lot of questions. I hope we gave you something to think about. I was afraid there for a while at the opening of the show the death of the American male was going to be me. Thank you all for helping out. From the Allen County Public Library, I'm Terry Doran. Good night.
And basically what it comes down to, if a male today had to assume all these things that society tries to put on him, their shoulders would not be big enough.